Is there a cooler looking character than Ghost Rider? I think I say this every time I talk about the Bonehead, but come on. Leather jacket, flaming skull, motorcycle from hell? It's no wonder they got this guy to play him in the movie. A movie that released during a time where a half-assed tie-in game was a given. The Ghost Rider video game was developed by Climax Action and released in February of 2007. It has several versions across multiple platforms, one being the GBA version, which I covered on this very channel. So check that out if you haven't. Today we're talking about the PS2 version. This is one that has been requested many times, and I'm excited to see how it holds up. Does the Rider tear the streets in a blaze of glory? Or does he shamefully faceplant on the hot pavement? Everyone remembers the Ghost Rider video game as a God of War knockoff, but I want to avoid making comparisons to the Angry Spartan as much as possible and critique Ghost Rider as its own title and all of its merits. Okay, so Ghost Rider is a couple of sex minigames short of just being straight up God of War. So I rescind my previous statement and let's talk about how similar this fucking game is to God of War. What we have here is one of those character action games like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and the already mentioned to death and will be continued to be mentioned God of War. These games have a strong focus on melee combat, and I've always thought them to be a good template for a superhero game. Seriously, if any developers out there want to make a safe, low-effort superhero game, just go with this genre. It fits just about anyone. Wolverine, Green Lantern, Thor. It was the early to mid-2000s Arkham syndrome. It makes sense. Superheroes are all about beating up waves of bad guys, so what better way to convey that than with an action game that ramps the action up to 11 with stylish combat. Throw in a couple of villains from the comics for boss fights, and you'll have what I would consider a decent video game at the very least. And that's pretty much what we have here with Ghost Rider. Combat has the expected combos of light and heavy attacks, using the Rider's signature blades of, hell chains. There's an extensive list of combos you can pull off, resulting in some badass animations of Ghost Rider whipping his chain around like it's no one's business. Throw in some projectiles in the form of a shotgun and some special attacks like the Penance Stare that instantly kills whoever you get a hold of, minus bosses, a big room clearing smash attack that kills most low level enemies, and you have what is a versatile combat system. I really appreciate that unlocking the entirety of the game's move list can be done fairly quick, giving you access to all of Ghost Rider's attacks well before the credits roll. So while this game's combat system is often referred to as a cheap knockoff of a more popular franchise, there is one thing it does that is really remarkable. You see, this game also has another trademark of character action games, and that is a style meter. While most games use a style meter as a means to let the player know how fucking cool they are for being able to link so many combos uninterrupted and affect your rank at the end of the level, well, Ghost Rider does that too, but it goes a step further and introduces enemies that have a shield around them, making them impervious to damage until the player reaches a certain threshold of the style meter. This is one of the most ingenious mechanics I've ever seen in a character action game, and one that I've yet to see in another one of these games. But I'm kinda talking on my ass, so I expect you to correct me in the comments. If indeed this system hasn't been in another action game, it should be a damn requirement. It is the perfect incentive for players to learn most, if not all, the different combos available to you. We've been here before, right? You're playing a Metal Gear Rising game or something, and the further you get into the game, you start to unlock longer and tougher to remember combos. So if you're like me, you say fuck all that and you stick with 2 or 3 reliable combos that'll hold you down for the rest of the game. Right? No? Just me? Fine. Well, for schmucks like me, that ain't gonna work in this game. If you keep using the same few combos over and over, your style meter won't reach the necessary level to take these special enemies down. That's pretty damn clever, and like I said, a concept that should be more common in this genre of video games. I think it's a missed opportunity to not incorporate the health cycle into combat, apart from its dedicated levels. We'll get to those later. To draw even more comparisons to other games, I think something like Dante's Cavalier from DMC5 would have worked perfectly here. Ghost Rider's motorcycle is his bread and butter, and should be more prominent in combat, Give me a simple dash attack that instantly summons the bike, or a crazy burnout move that turns enemies into toast. There are several instances where after beating a boss, you collect a soul holding the power of one of the elements. Wind soul, water soul, earth soul. It was underwhelming to not gain new abilities after collecting these. It even plays this animation of Ghost Rider's body absorbing the soul, which led me to think I was about to unlock a new power. Now, I don't think Ghost Rider actually has this ability in the comics, but whatever man, creative freedom. Instead, what these souls are used for are to unlock these force fields that stop you from progressing further into the level. And while on the topic of levels, let's talk about how basic these things are. You'll go through an assortment of different environments: an old town, a church, lab, city street, hell, naturally. While the majority of these levels consist of sections that are structured more like an arena to give you plenty of room to whip, spin, and slam, those sections are linked together by hallways that might as well not be in the game. I understand these parts are meant to break up the pace of the levels and give you a bit of breathing room between each fight, but they are so shallow and inconsequential. You literally walk from one end of the hallway to the other, and you're back to doing what you just were in the previous room. They could have used some puzzles or platforming to give these small breaks between the action some meaning. Like another game I know. Platforming. That's another missed opportunity that could have easily been implemented using Ghost Rider's Hell Chains. Not asking for anything fancy like a whole swinging system a la Spider-Man 2, but maybe some sequences where you zip from point to point like... yeah. Rev up that cycle, cause I'm sure hungry for some vehicle sections. When you're not killing demons with your hell chains, you'll be tearing the streets with your hell cycle in these vehicle levels, which leave a lot to be desired. But let's start with the good. The cycle controls pretty well. I never struggled when making turns or even when they introduced platforming. Yeah, you heard that right. Platforming with a motorcycle. Surprisingly, that's kind of the highlight of these levels in my opinion. These sections where you have to make crazy wide jumps are exhilarating. They get pretty intense too when they start throwing in narrow beams that your bike barely fits on. And nothing is cooler than power sliding into a group of enemies in slow motion. Other forms of combat include fireball shots and whipping enemies on your left and right side using the square and triangle buttons, respectively. What really bugs me about these Hell Cycle levels is how much they look like a Mario Kart track, with big red arrows telling you where to turn, when to jump, and when to slide. I expected there to be power-ups along the way. I would have liked something that felt a little more organic. This is gonna sound like a really dumb criticism for a low-budget licensed PS2 game, but these tracks feel too video gamey. I think if the game had some levels that opened up a lot more with wide, stretching landscapes, or should I say hellscapes, those would be perfect to ride the Hell Cycle through. Think of the sections in Darksiders where you can summon your Phantom Horse Ruin. Hey, look at that! I graduated from comparing this game to God of War to comparing it to Darksiders. Staying consistent with its cinematic counterpart, Ghost Rider's story stinks. It doesn't adapt the movie's plot besides having a short recap of GR's origin. Instead, it tells a different story involving demons disrupting the balance between heaven and hell and eventually causing Armageddon. We've heard it 666 times before. However, I do like the twist of Mephisto sending Ghost Rider to specific locations that would result in his Hell Cycle inscribing a glyph into the earth because of the routes he took, thus resurrecting Blackheart. The story is told through motion comic style cutscenes that are kinda low effort. There's not a lot of movement in them and the art doesn't exactly pop. A lot of comic book movie tie-in games did this back in the day. I get the feeling that devs would use the excuse of, oh, this is a comic book game, we can pay homage to the source material by having static images for our cutscenes. This is comic book cutscenes done right. This is just lame. Unfortunately, Nicolas Cage doesn't lend his talents nor likeness to the video game. I mean, just take a look. This guy resembles Nick Cage as much as this hairpiece is convincing. Like any decent comic book game, Ghost Rider has a fair share of unlockables, behind the scenes videos, concept art, comic books, and of course, alternate costumes. You can even play as Blade once you beat the game. He makes a brief cameo in the game's story, and I thought it would have been cool to have a short, unique campaign telling his side of the story, but it's the same as Ghost Rider's. Nevertheless, it's really cool to have a totally separate character with his own weapon and moves list. He has his trademark sword and is able to replenish his health by grabbing onto enemies and sucking the life force out of them.
Yes! Yes!
Ghost Rider was released during a time where we would get these mediocre movie tie-in games every other week. These games were a dime a dozen, and though they didn't do anything special, I kinda miss those times. Watching the dumb movie opening weekend and getting the dumb game based on that dumb movie on the same weekend, that kind of thing is from days gone by. Ghost Rider is by no means extraordinary, nor is it exactly good, but it's a worthy companion to its equally schlocky cinematic counterpart. This video game is of a higher class of trashy games. Tastefully average. Ghost Rider is mediocre at its finest.
Ready for my penance stare?